I'm Cleverghoul, but you can call me Nikki. Welcome back to the channel! I've been fascinated by tunnel books for a while, and I've been wanting to make one since the first time I saw one. So that's what we're doing this week. This is a very customizable project. You can use any medium that you like. You can make it very simple or very intricate. You can make it as big or as small as you like to. It's really up to you. Without drawing time, mine took about 4 or 5 hours to make. And that will vary for you based on your skill level and how intricate you're getting. With all that being said, let's get into it. For materials, you'll need a cutting mat, an X-Acto knife and ruler, paper, a pencil, a permanent glue stick, and any art supply you want to use to make your design. Paint, markers, crayons, colored pencils, and so on. I use this beautiful Japanese watercolor set. I chose it because it can be used as both watercolor and gouache, which makes it really fun to play with, and micron pens, which I love because they won't run if you paint over them with watercolor, and they can be used on top of dry paint as well. Like I said, you could use whatever you like, but I have added my Amazon affiliate links for the products I've used in the description, and if you end up using those links, I do get a small commission, so thank you. I drew out a rough sketch of each panel and layered them to see if I liked how they would look. As you can see, I have 3 panels, a background, middle ground, and foreground. You need at least 3 layers in order to create the perspective needed in a tunnel book. This is also why the moon is so small and the bats are much larger, because I want the moon to appear further away from the viewer. From here, I cut my paper. First I made 3-inch strips, then I cut those, flipped them around horizontally, and cut at the 2.5-inch mark going across. In the end, I was left with 6 pieces that were 3 inches by 2.5 inches. To make the sides, I made a 2.5-inch by 8-inch strip, cut that in half, and then measured 1/4 inch going all the way down. I realized I needed a lot less than I had cut, so I cut one of the rectangles in half. Then with my X-Acto knife and ruler, I scored along those marks, not cutting all the way through, and folded those scores up and down like an accordion. I wanted my background piece to be extra sturdy, so I glued 2 pieces together, then I went around and marked a 1/4 inch border along all of the panel pieces. This is a part on each panel that will need to connect to the side pieces and therefore can't be cut. Then I began to draw my foreground panel, and then I carefully cut out the negative space. I layered it on top of the middle panel and roughly marked where the cloud would be so I knew where to position everything, and then I drew on the bats. Once those were to my liking, I cut out the negative space. I then layered up the foreground and middle ground on top of the background piece and roughly marked where things were positioned, and then drew out my background. This will stay a solid piece. With a 0.5 micron pen, I went in and made my main lines and erased the pencil left over. For some of the detailed pieces, I went back in with a 0.005 micron and added them in, especially in the background. When it was time to paint, I started with the background piece. Then I slowly started adding in the background colors. I also sprinkled some salt on the watercolor when still wet to add a little texture, but because of the paper I was using, which isn't made for watercolor, it didn't add as much as I'd hoped for. I went back and forth between each panel, adding in color slowly to build up depth. I let everything dry and then went in with Posca markers to add some extra details. Using scrap paper, I made a little box for the tunnel book to sit in. I used the measurements I had, added 1/2 inch for the sides and bottom, and then I scored along the edges and glued it together. I then began to attach the panels to the sides. Starting with the background, I put glue down on the edge of the side and then placed the panel on top and held it down. I noticed the back panel was a little beat up and I didn't want the edges from the sides to show, so I covered it up with a piece of the blue paper I had used for the box. Then I attached the middle panel, and lastly the foreground panel. Finally, I decorated the box I had made and that was it, which means it's time for the reveal. And here it is. I am so happy with how this turned out. I know I say that all the time, but I really had a lot of fun with this project. I have been feeling a little stuck creatively, and something about this just really pulled me out of a rut. I could have sat here and played and made a million of these. I still want to make a million more with more detail. It was just such a fun project and really helped me kick out some of the creative cobwebs that I'd been feeling lately. I love the little clouds and the moon, but I think the bats are just so cute, and I had to add in a little pink on their ears and on their cheeks just to make them a little cutesy. But I really love how whimsical this is, and I'm so happy with how it turned out, and I can't wait to make more. Would you try this at home? And what kind of design would you make? I would love to hear, so let me know in the comments. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!